In the autumn of 1857, when secrets were whispered on the wind through the tall pines of North Carolina, the Redwick family believed themselves blessed. Their plantation house stood proud amidst acres of tobacco fields, its white columns gleaming in the southern sun, its windows like watchful eyes surveying their domain. Through determination and shrewd business dealings, Thomas Redwick had built his fortune, establishing himself as one of the county's most respected men. His wife Eleanor, known for her grace and beauty, managed their household with precision while raising their 3 children, Margaret, Samuel, and young Emily. A testament to southern prosperity and genteel living, the Redwick estate was the jewel of Craven County. The main house, with its grand facade and sprawling verandas, had been meticulously restored by Thomas after he purchased the property in 1844. The previous owner's name, Ambrose, had been nearly forgotten, scrubbed away like a stain from local memory. That the house had stood abandoned for 15 years before Thomas claimed it for a fraction of its worth was something few remembered. Fewer still spoke of why the house itself was a masterpiece of Greek Revival architecture, with its 3 stories of imposing symmetry surrounded by 12 majestic Doric columns. Each morning, as the sun rose over the eastern tobacco fields, the white-painted exterior blazed like fire against the verdant landscape. No less impressive was the interior. Imported from Brazil were the mahogany floors, from France the wallpaper, and from the finest artisans in Charleston and Richmond the crafted furniture. Every detail spoke of wealth thoughtfully applied, from the intricately carved banister of the main staircase to the silver door handles polished daily by house servants. Local superstitions were not something Thomas concerned himself with. Born in Pennsylvania to a family of industrialists, he had moved south with visions of agricultural empire, bringing his northern sensibilities and a dismissive attitude toward what he called country folklore. His wife Eleanor, daughter of a Charleston shipping magnate, shared his pragmatic worldview. Together they had transformed a neglected property into a showpiece, filling it with fine furnishings, imported artworks, and 7 ornate mirrors strategically placed to reflect light and create an impression of even greater spaciousness. Eleanor's particular pride were those mirrors, the largest hung in the grand entrance hall, an enormous gilt-framed piece that had once graced a Parisian salon. Dominating the formal dining room was another with a frame of carved mahogany inlaid with mother-of-pearl. Reflecting Thomas's book collection in the library was a sober, masculine mirror in a frame of polished walnut. A looking glass appropriate to its occupant was contained in each bedroom. Margaret's was feminine and delicate, Samuel's sturdy and plain, and young Emily's, encircled with carved wooden flowers and small birds. Hanging in her private dressing room was the 7th mirror, Eleanor's personal favorite, an antique piece that had belonged to her grandmother, its silver backing worn thin with age and countless reflections. But with the seasons, fortunes change, and that fall, as the leaves turned crimson and gold, something stirred within the walls of the Redwick estate, something that would test the family's faith, their sanity, and ultimately their survival. On October 18th, the first incident occurred. The day had passed like many others on the plantation. Thomas had ridden out to inspect the tobacco harvest. Eleanor had entertained the wives of neighboring landowners for tea. Under the supervision of Miss Hartley, the governess brought down from Baltimore the previous spring, the children had attended to their studies. At precisely 6 o'clock, dinner had been served, as always, roast pheasant with cranberry sauce, potatoes, and fresh greens from the kitchen garden. Afterward, Thomas had retired to his study to review the ledgers while Eleanor supervised the children's evening activities, piano practice for Margaret, Latin translations for Samuel, and simple embroidery for Emily. After supper, the family had retired to their bedchambers, as was their custom. While reviewing accounts in the library, Thomas had enjoyed his usual glass of brandy. Retreating to her own room, Eleanor had checked on the children first, pausing as always to admire her reflection in the gilded mirror that had been her grandmother's. At her vanity, 17-year-old Margaret had spent an extra moment, brushing her dark hair with exactly 100 strokes, as a proper young lady should. Before sleep, 14-year-old Samuel had polished his hunting rifle, dreaming of the buck he hoped to track that weekend. And 10-year-old Emily, the family's treasure with her golden curls and curious nature, had whispered her prayers before her mother tucked her beneath the quilted coverlet. Into the comfortable silence of night the house settled, broken only by the occasional creak of the old wooden beams adjusting to the cooling air. Low and orange over the tobacco fields, a harvest moon hung outside, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. Through the kitchens and quarters behind the main house, a few servants still moved quietly, preparing for the following day's work. In the distance, an owl called 3 times, a sound the local workers might have interpreted as an omen, though no Redwick would acknowledge such foolishness. It happened when the time was precisely 11:17 p.m. Through the corridors echoed a sound like ice cracking across a frozen pond, then another, and another. 7 distinct breaks in rapid succession were followed by the delicate tinkling of shattered glass falling to the floor. Bolting upright in his bed, Thomas reached for the flintlock pistol he kept in his nightstand drawer, a habit from his early days in the territory when dangers had seemed more corporeal. Gasping awake beside him, Eleanor clutched the quilted coverlet to her chest, her normally composed features distorted with sudden fear. "Stay here," Thomas commanded, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. He lit the kerosene lamp on his bedside table, the golden light pushing back the darkness as he moved cautiously into the hallway. As he moved, his nightshirt billowed around his sturdy frame, casting enormous shadows against the damask wallpaper. At her door, Margaret appeared, her long dark hair tumbling over her shoulders, her face pale in the dim light. Around her nightgown, she clutched a shawl, propriety maintained even in alarm. "Father, what was that noise?" "I don't know, child. Wake your brother, but keep Emily in her room." Nodding, Margaret slipped back through her doorway with the quiet grace her mother had instilled in her through years of instruction and proper ladylike behavior. From his room, Samuel emerged moments later, his lanky frame still awkward with adolescence, clutching a fire poker. His hair stood up in sleep-tousled spikes, but his eyes were alert and wary. "I heard it too, father. Like something breaking." Together, father and son searched the house, moving from room to room with weapons raised. As they proceeded, the kerosene lamp cast their shadows in elongated, distorted shapes across walls and ceilings. They started in the grand foyer with its black and white marble tiles, then proceeded to the formal dining room where 20 guests could be comfortably seated beneath the crystal chandelier imported from France. Next came the parlor with its fashionable horsehair furniture and Axminster carpet. When they reached it, Thomas held the lamp higher, illuminating a scene of inexplicable destruction. Across the polished wooden floor lay the ornate mirror that had hung above the fireplace for 20 years, a wedding gift from Eleanor's father, now in fragments. The gilded frame remained on the wall, but the reflective surface it had contained was scattered in a starburst pattern, as if something had burst outward from within. "Good Lord," Samuel whispered, the fire poker drooping slightly in his grip. In the drawing room, another mirror had suffered the same fate, its pieces distributed across the pianoforte and delicate writing desk where Eleanor penned her correspondence. As they continued their inspection, they discovered that every mirror in the house, 7 in total, had shattered simultaneously, yet nothing else had been disturbed. Dully in the lamplight, the silver remained gleaming in its cabinet. Untouched on her dressing table sat Eleanor's jewelry. From the inside, the doors and windows were securely locked. On its usual hook in Thomas's study hung the key to the main entrance. No sign of forced entry. No footprints in the carefully raked gravel path that surrounded the house. "Could it have been an earthquake?" Samuel suggested, running his fingers through his tousled hair. Frowning, Thomas furrowed his prominent brow deeply. No tremors. No other objects fell. Only the mirrors. He ran his fingers along the edge of the empty frame, examining it for any sign of tampering. Finding none, he knelt to inspect the pattern of breakage, noting how the glass had exploded outward rather than collapsing inward as it might from impact. Could it be a prank? Perhaps one of the field hands. The doors were locked, Samuel. The windows secured. Thomas's voice was tight with puzzlement and mounting concern. Besides, Who would destroy valuable property merely for a jest? And how could anyone break all 7 mirrors at precisely the same moment? When they returned upstairs to report their findings, they found Eleanor comforting a trembling Emily, whose wide blue eyes reflected a fear beyond her years. With unusual intensity, the child's small fingers clutched her mother's sleeve, her normally rosy complexion now ashen. "The faces," the child whispered. "The faces in the mirrors were watching us." With the gentle authority of a mother accustomed to dismissing childish fancies, Eleanor hushed her. "It was just a bad dream, darling, coinciding with the noise that woke us all." But Emily shook her head stubbornly, her golden curls bouncing with the movement. "I saw them before the breaking. They weren't our faces. They were the other family, the ones who lived here before." Over their daughter's head, Thomas and Eleanor exchanged concerned glances. With the children, they had never discussed the house's previous occupants. Indeed, Thomas had made a point of not dwelling on the property's history, focusing instead on the legacy he intended to build. "Emily," Thomas said, his voice deliberately measured. "You've been listening to stories from the house staff again, haven't you?" The child lowered her eyes. "Abigail says this house remembers things we want to forget." "That will be quite enough," Thomas declared. "Abigail has no business filling your head with nonsense. Tomorrow we shall have a serious discussion about appropriate topics for servants to discuss in this household." Emily did not respond, but in the flickering lamplight, Thomas thought he saw a look pass over his youngest daughter's face, something like pity, as if she possessed knowledge that he, for all his education and authority, could not access.